already.
They fall right in.
Welcome everyone this morning. Wanted to call to order the April 3rd, 2026 City of Portsmouth Economic Development Commission meeting. We do have a quorum today, and we're back on our regular monthly meeting schedule, having had our last meeting 2 weeks ago because our March meeting was delayed by a winter storm. With that, we'll get into approving the draft minutes from that March 20th meeting. And I'll just start by asking if there was any corrections on the minutes that we can take care of.
There's one in the second paragraph where Richard's last name is.
Okay. All right.
But I don't.
Is there a motion to approve otherwise?
So moved.
Second. Any questions or discussion? If not, those in favor of approving the minutes as distributed with Commissioner Watson's revision signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the meeting minutes are approved as revised. Today we have a master plan update from city consultants UTIL. Zoe Mueller is with us. Hi, Zoe.
Hi there, how are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. So show today, we allotted about 20 minutes for the presentation.
Great.
Like a generous 10 minutes Q&A discussion too, I think, because we're probably going to have we'll probably have a robust conversation afterwards. And just as a reminder, the EDC at the end of last year had a group that submitted content from the EDC for the document that Zoe is going to be talking about this morning, and those that content was accepted, incorporated in the master plan as appropriate. So we look forward to hearing about the state of the master plan, learning learning a little bit about where those the EDC information landed, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zoe. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna screen share over here and then I'll get us started. All right, everyone seeing those slides okay?
Yep. Yes. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So my name's Zoe Mueller, and I am the project manager for the consultant team, work for UTIL. And what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to give you kind of a quick rundown of where we are in the planning process, where we've landed in terms of what we've learned from engagement and from other stakeholders that have shared input with us, like yourselves. And then I've sort of suggested a couple of things that I think might be good discussion topics for us, but we can obviously take the discussion wherever you want it to go. So with that, I'll jump right in, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through this, but we can return to anything that you want to discuss further. So just as a reminder, to kind of frame what a master plan is and what it's best at, I think of it as a strategic plan for where and how the city should develop, generally over the course of like a 10+ year time frame. There's kind of regular cadence of updates, and so the idea is we give a 10-year horizon, but it might last longer than that. So we want to kind of have that long range view. And master plans are best at aligning development regulations, so land use, zoning, et cetera, to investments in infrastructure, so municipal services, infrastructure, utilities, et cetera, to kind of bring those together and drive something that gets better quality of life and kind of a unified vision across the board. So that's what we're really aimed towards. But it won't be kind of every single action from this. This is not really a checklist so much as a guide. So that I would think of it that way. Like if you're trying to do a strategic plan for an organization, that's what this is. And in particular, we focused on how to link housing, economy, and the development patterns or urban form of Portsmouth, and to think about how your downtown relates to other centers and sort of hubs of activity throughout your community. So that's kind of that was a core focus of this plan because of the wealth of planning that the city has already done that's covered a lot of the other ground. And to kind of put a little bit of a finer point on that, that means that we're really, the core of the plan is about linking economy, housing, transportation and mobility, and land use and urban form. Those are kind of the foundational topics that create that unified strategy. And then we fold into that all these cross-cutting topics that have important implications for how those core four function. And so there's, this is not a secondary set. These are all very important, but they're really about shaping how these respond to those sort of factors. So in terms of where we are in the process, we're kind of at the draft plan point. So we haven't written out the whole document, but all of the sort of recommendations where we think the plan is going to land, we've locked in on that, and we want to share that for feedback with all of the stakeholders kind of within the city and within the city's kind of governing bodies like yourselves, as well as with the public. So that's, we're doing the kind of stakeholder bit right now. And then later on in April, on the 22nd, we'll have the public open house. And so that'll kind of be our big feedback juncture. And then once we've received that feedback, we'll go into the final plan writing to kind of get that final document that codifies all of that. So you all know Ann Weidman, obviously. So she's been serving as our community organizer throughout the process and did a huge push over the summer to get that foundational input on vision, values, goals. And so what you'll see here today is kind of a culmination of what we heard in that first flush of engagement. So you can see just kind of the numbers here. I'm not going to go through this in detail in the interest of time, but you can see here there's a really broad base that Ann helped us establish to kind of jumpstart the plan with really sort of significant input from a lot of different cross sections of Portsmouth's community. And one of the things that I just wanted to highlight from that is early on, we had this very simple prompt of what's something that you love about Portsmouth, what's something that you would change or something that would make Portsmouth better. And very clearly in that, the business community, the vibrancy and the economic vitality of Portsmouth came through as something that's just core to what people love about Portsmouth, not just what keeps Portsmouth running, but like it's part of the identity of Portsmouth. That's what people value about this community. And so you can see that kind of in the love here, history, art, restaurants and activities, the community and the people. That has everything to do with, also the business community, and the feeling of a small city with the vibrancy of a big city. Again, I would read into that kind of what do you expect in a big city? You expect a really rich business community with a lot of activities. And so I just wanted to kind of give a nod to that. That's something that we saw come through, not just in a functional way as like economic development is important for jobs and resources, but it's also part of how people see the city. So I'll come back to that a little bit, but I just wanted to highlight then, following on that visioning stage engagement, what we've been doing since is kind of a little bit more about calibrating, validating, tweaking to see if what we landed on for vision, values, and goals is working for people, if people feel good about it. And so we've gotten some great validation of that so far, including things that have triggered some small changes. I won't go over those changes in detail, but I just want to sort of note that it has continued to evolve with each of those checkpoints of kind of engagement that we've pushed out. So Flashvote is a statistically representative survey tool that the city pays for across the board, and sort of we've used as a first way of validating the vision, values, and goals. And then right now we have an active survey that's more publicly available broadly that we're continuing to get feedback on the same kinds of things. We also just recently launched a survey for that's targeted towards small businesses and also workers in hospitality and sort of retail, arts, and culture sectors within the city. So some of you have heard about that. We're hoping you can all help us push that out and get more feedback. We know it's, the business community is perhaps the most busy and like overextended group. And so it is difficult to get good feedback from folks because they're running their business. That's their primary focus, right? And so we're hoping to kind of use this moment in the plan to get some of that, to flush out some more of that feedback in a way that's attainable for people. So we've put together a very short survey to just get a feel for some of those issues and help us make sure that we're on track. So with that, I'll run through where we've landed for vision, values, goals, and also kind of how that translates into spatial framework, which is a very important part of making those vision, values, goals come through and happen in the world. So vision statement, this is actually a nod to something that the Chamber of Commerce did back in the 20s, but I'll just read through here. Portsmouth will continue to cultivate our role as the Seacoast region's cultural and economic hub, protect the places that anchor our shared identity and historic character, and invest in sustainability and resilience. As the city of the open door, we will support the people who create our community, expand attainable housing options for residents at every stage of life, and ensure our city is accessible and well-connected. Together, we will work to keep Portsmouth a beautiful, vibrant, and welcoming home for generations to come. So you can think of that as kind of a North Star. We kind of everything that we're doing, we're checking against that. Is it helping us get closer to that vision? These are the core values that kind of bridge from that to our goals. These are sort of a light update to the core values or the themes that came through in the prior master plan. And so these are kind of, hopefully you see these threaded through the more kind of topic specific or targeted goals that I'll go through in a moment. So vibrancy, authenticity, inclusivity, connectivity, sustainability, and resiliency are kind of the set that we're trying to track through all of the individual recommendations and ideas that we're presenting. In terms of goals, and this is kind of the architecture of the plan document, and also kind of where we nest individual recommendations. So I'll go a little bit later on in the presentation, I'll go a bit deeper into this one, which obviously has very direct implications for your work and your kind of focus area. But the goals cover investing in quality of place, calibrating and creating diverse housing, promoting balanced, fiscally responsible development, cultivating our economy, and protecting core identity. So those are kind of the pillars you might think of, kind of the recommendations that follow. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but just to kind of have that in mind as sort of the framework that we're working with. So with that, I want to introduce the spatial component. So how we think about this in terms of what it means for spatial questions of where development happens and why, and what kind of development. So Portsmouth has a really mature, built out downtown, vibrant, people love it. Obviously there's always work to be done. There's always little tweaks around the edges. But we wanted to kind of, use this master plan as a way of signaling like there's a shift, it's pretty built out. And so it's really about those little tweaks. And we want to give a similar level of focus to other kind of areas of the city. And so, and that's not just because of downtown itself being quite mature and built out. It's also because prices are driving folks in the community, both on a business side and on a housing side, further out from downtown into the neighborhoods that surround downtown, and really trying to find a way to anchor there to deal with some of the price pressures that people are experiencing, trying to access and be part of downtown. And so that means kind of how do we look beyond downtown to try and fulfill and sort of extend some of the things that people love about downtown in a way that makes sense for other parts of Portsmouth. And that's, already coming to fruition in a lot of ways. Both public investments and private investments are kind of on the uptick in neighborhoods outside of downtown. And so what we want to try and do with this sort of master plan is help to shape, how that all comes together. There's a lot of activity and really trying to make sure that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, And so this is just kind of putting that on a map, looking at over the last kind of several years, where are we seeing concentrations of this? What you're seeing here is kind of new permits for new construction or renovations, split by commercial industrial on the left and residential on the right. So you can see obviously downtown lights up in both of those, but you're also seeing clusters outside of downtown. And so that's what we're trying to recognize and sort of shape with this master plan is how do we really give that a clear direction and really unify both public and private investments around a shared vision for those places within the city. The gateway neighborhoods, and particularly the gateway neighborhood zoning districts that were implemented in 2017 are a really important tool for that. And so that's also a recognition, even predating this master plan, of kind of what those roles, those parts of the city have to play in sort of meeting all of these goals that people share with us through the visioning process. And so you'll see as I come later on in the presentation that this is something that is sort of a jumping off point for us. And so what that means, is we're taking kind of the same level of care that's been given to all of the rich planning work that's been done downtown, and we're trying to use this master plan to kind of jumpstart that framing, that way of thinking about the gateway neighborhoods and sort of the parts of Portsmouth that feed into and support downtown. So what that looks like we've established a degree of change mapping, which is indicating kind of what parts of the city their focus is really on preservation, so encouraging adaptive reuse, restoration, conservation, versus places where we're looking at enhancing sort of targeted improvements for flexibility and quality of life. And then places where there's a more dramatic, a desire to adapt. So that's, promoting a shift in the development pattern. And a lot of those places you'll see lit up in yellow here are places that were sort of more auto-oriented, single-use developments, kind of in the, post-war era for the most part, and sort of looking at how can we make those more flexible and able to support the full range of what Portsmouth folks are asking for. And that includes kind of the business community in those places. So to just kind of put a finer point on that, this is sort of a reading of the pattern of the city today. So what we call place types. That's a mix of physical form and also use patterns. And so you're seeing kind of urban core here, and then different neighborhood types radiating out and different sort of employment and civic hubs beyond downtown. We've defined out kind of the specifics of what all those mean, and kind of the big idea of this plan that's emerged through this process is we want to really be deliberate about creating and reinforcing neighborhood centers for the gateway neighborhoods beyond downtown. And so you'll see here in each of these sort of study area, that we've highlighted here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're looking at how do we reinforce and sort of cultivate a neighborhood center in those places, because there's already all the right ingredients there. They just need a little bit of oomph to kind of bring it all together. And that's what we see that as kind of a local destination, has a dynamic mix of housing, commercial uses, public spaces, institutions, and infrastructure that serve the immediate neighborhood surrounding it. So it's sort of like a mini downtown for a neighborhood. And so that is something that, we looked at, relative to kind of all of these goals. How do we kind of help to bring all those goals together in these places? So I'm not going to go through them in detail, but we did study each of those kind of 5 in closer detail. But what I want to kind of explain about the idea is that this is really about like a coherent vision that brings together public and private investment. And so it's a lot of different things that relate to infrastructure and mobility. It's being really deliberate about civic, recreation, kind of amenities that support that area, and also, land use controls and development that brings that density and that vibrancy. And this is, obviously a big, an important area where the business community shows up, and sort of is a huge part of making this vision vibrant and exciting and authentic and consistent with kind of like the, who's here, what people want to bring into the forefront. So we did a kind of a hypothetical kind of visioning level concept for the West End as a way of demonstrating like what we mean by these ideas. So this is not intended as like a, concrete development proposal. A lot of this is private land. It's really just trying to show an idea of how all this could come together. And so things like strengthening bike and pedestrian connections, creating a safer kind of intersection around Bartlett and Islington, creating more dynamic kind of programmable plaza style open space that's flexible with parking areas, creating a shared parking, district level approach can help to free up some of that space. So that's kind of the type of thinking that we're trying to trigger in these places, and sort of think about what that evolution of the place looks like. And another important piece is really connecting the street network, sort of making these a little bit more walkable, more connected, more possible to kind of move about without, relying on a car for every part of your link in that local area. So just kind of a zoom in of that. So to distill that, looking at places that are clustered, they're connected, they're accessible and inclusive, and they're bringing forward the kind of the elements of design and investment that make them healthy, resilient, and sustainable. So that's kind of, we've gone through each of them and created, a jump start to help people understand what we think would make a difference to get closer to those ideas. Let me wait for it to jump to the next slide. Give me a little bit of slowdown here. There we go. So I'll go through these ones really quickly, and then I'll turn over to you for Q&A. So I want to just flash up our draft economic development kind of recommendations, the things that are focused on that goal 4, and then show you a little bit of how that goes into mobility and zoning. So this is a lot of text. I'm assuming we'll probably come back to this for discussion, but I just want to highlight the objectives that are kind of the three things that nest in under this goal 4. And then there's individual kind of recommendations that support them. So these are kind of thematic groupings of the kinds of action that we think will make a difference and move us closer to that vision, values, and goals that people shared with us through the envisioning work. So the first objective is around small business. So strengthening the collection of small and local businesses that create Portsmouth's vibrancy. It's really being deliberate about how to really support that sort of that community and make it something that, you know, recognize the challenges that small businesses are facing and really give deliberate support for those folks that are really creating that scene that people rely on. Helping to rebalance a little bit too with kind of some of the bigger, the folks that are more capitalized, that are more able to kind of compete downtown, and sort of making space for everyone to really show up and be part of kind of what makes Portsmouth special. The second one is around the tourism and hospitality sector. So looking at how to not just, you know, continue to keep it healthy, but really to maximize its impact and sort of that relationship to like, how is it benefiting and helping Portsmouth thrive, not just, you know, it as it's a standalone industry. And then the last one is more around kind of business attraction and kind of growing and supporting anchor employers. So looking at how to position Portsmouth as a premier regional job hub for growing industries by strengthening core sectors, cultivating an innovation hub, and securing high impact anchor tenants. So again, we can come back to this for discussion if we'd like to. All of this really relies on strengthening some mobility alternatives beyond downtown, sort of bringing some of that, you know, Portsmouth iconic walkability downtown, you know, helping to extend that, you know, beyond downtown, and looking at bike priority, looking at micromobility, so, you know, things like scooters, e-bikes, et cetera, and looking at transit, how all of those come together to make the links between downtown and these other parts of the city stronger. That also means looking at key intersections and kind of gateways or thresholds that are important for people's access to those destinations and their orientation, their perception of how to get where they need to go. And then last but not least, zoning. So looking at how do we make some targeted tweaks in zoning, in line with this idea about where we're focusing on preservation, where we're focusing on enhancements, and where we're focusing on adaptation. And so the thing that I wanted to highlight here is that within the Gateway neighborhood mixed use districts that the city put in place in 2017, some of the things that we're really kind of keying in on for continued refinement of those districts is looking at incentives and bonuses that not just promote affordable housing, but also looking at affordable commercial space and commercial residential development balance in those districts. Also looking at, you know, process and design guidelines that can kind of turn up the dial and really help encourage that genuine mixed use of housing and commercial, and also to kind of realign the districts to really emphasize like where we think the center is for each of these. So not just kind of across the board, the Gateway corridor, which is more in use right now. There are more areas that are zoned for that Gateway corridor use. Looking at where do we insert little moments of Gateway Center to really signal to the market and to the business community and to all the property owners, kind of this is where we see the hub emerging. So with that, just to give you a sense of outlook, we have the draft recommendations that are kind of moving through internal review right now. We're expecting to share out with this group and some others on the 17th of the month for more kind of, you know, granular review. And then public outreach is ongoing. We have that draft plan framework survey for vision, values, and goals. We also have the targeted one that's sort of like a mini survey for the business community and for workers in those sectors. And then we really want to, you know, to get people aware that we're having a big public open house on April 22nd. It'll be at the community center at 6 p.m. Community campus at 6 p.m. And this is kind of the last of 3 of our kind of pre-briefings of before that that open house to just get folks aware and sort of understanding what where we're headed with the plan and get some feedback. So with that, thanks for the extra couple minutes, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Zoe. I'll turn it over to our group for Q&A. I have a question for later, so I'm going to go to the group right now and see if anyone else wants to jump in. All right, I'll ask my question now. I'm kind of like focused on the end of the process and a little bit of the PR. Times when, especially commercial real estate developers are working on, let's say, I love that West End drawing that you showed there. That's sometimes the master plan gets brought out during a planning board meeting or during that planning board process, and that developer or that team's never seen it. Does your group have recommendations for kind of just the PR, especially right after that draft is developed? Like, is there, a website banner or stuff like, stuff in addition to like your regular public outreach and your process going through?
Yeah, that's a great question. We find in general that, at this point in our collective sort of, how people get information, it's often like you need multiple strategies to reach people. Different people are going to different hubs of information. So mostly that is to say that the work of getting the word out is more complex than it seems. But I think exactly the kinds of things you recommended are great starting points. Is just kind of like have it prominent on your website, push it out through the communications channels that you already have with a network that's kind of engaged with the city. The other thing that we often do as part of this is kind of have like a short flyer at the end. It's kind of like just the very basics of the master plan. That's usually more useful for like your average resident or kind of, business community member versus a developer. And one of the things that can be really effective for the developers, and this is something that I didn't sort of dwell on, but that is sort of embedded at this point in some of our recommendations, is there's kind of a process opportunity in terms of how people come to the city with development proposals. You can encourage like pre-meetings. So pre-application meetings, it's a bit of an administrative burden, right? It's staff time that you're dedicating to that, but it can be a really effective way of just encouraging that early conversation and building awareness among the development community of what the city is looking for before they come to you with a full proposal that they've invested time and resources in creating. So that's something that might be worth considering, recognizing it does have a staff time burden to it.
Sure.
Would you mind going back, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 slides, specifically to the business and economic impact? Keep going back. Maybe 3 and 4. Yeah, 4. Can we just like take a minute to be able to read the stuff that you're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go back one more and then we can go in sequence. So this is the one that's sort of focused on local business community. And apologies for not circulating this in advance. It's hot off the presses, so getting premium access here.
Maybe we can see if there's any questions on this and then move ahead to the other 2 slides.
Does anyone want to jump in with a question?
Yeah, can you go forward 1 slide, please, Zoe?
Mm-hmm.
So this next slide is really pretty significant around tourism and hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
So, which I love, right? Obviously, Chamber of Commerce, we're all about it. We work very hard in this space. But, I've been here 10 years, and growing shoulder season tourism has been on the to-do list for, 20 years.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm curious from and maybe this is a city manager question, I don't really know, but, how does the city envision playing a more a stronger role in areas like this? Like, it doesn't fit into a city department kind of work plan generally. So I'm just curious how this goes from great ideas to like actual change in the community.
Role in
Yeah.
I think that's a question to almost flip back to you together, so we answer it together. What do you need from the city in terms of civic investment, public commitment beyond what we typically do? Maybe that's a strategic planning session between your board and this group and perhaps, Public Works and
I'm interested in the revenue per visitor strategy, because that seems to be at odds about, from a residential perspective, making sure that this is, unless I'm not misunderstanding, that this is a city that's accessible to everyone. So how do you balance increased revenue per visitor with making the city's attractions that are interesting for both visitors and residents affordable and accessible?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think it's part of the kind of a subtler point about what that ultimately means. So it doesn't necessarily mean just raising the prices on everything, or kind of getting something to be more, catering to a higher price point customer. It can just mean thinking about, like, if somebody is kind of coming into the city, how do we encourage them to, like, stay and have dinner here and have, increase the amount of interaction that they're having with the business community, with services, so that they're kind of, they're participating more at that level versus each individual experience itself being expensive.
I would say value per visitor, because otherwise if you put the word revenue in here, it makes it seem like it's not a city
Yeah,
for everyone.
that's a great point. Yeah, those subtle messaging things matter a lot. So I appreciate you raising that.
Mr. Blaylock?
Thank you, Zoe, for this presentation. But to that point, Portsmouth, we get affluence and very nice, expensive. That happens naturally. The affordable part is the hard part that we've been having a hard time hanging on to. We have the disadvantage or advantage. You want to be being a tax haven. Is the state manager. I used to live in Incline Village out in Tahoe. That's another, income village. They're selling homes for $320 million out there right now. So I see this, that's going to happen naturally. I think our biggest challenge is, like Commissioner LaChance said, trying to keep the affordability, trying to keep it accessible to everybody. Because again, that's going to push out the small businesses as well. We're starting to get more conglomerates. A lot of the restaurants are owned by the same company, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's one of the things that we think is an important, like, bigger picture framing around this idea of really supporting a thriving center within each of these gateway neighborhoods, that I think for a lot of, especially like small and local businesses that are trying to compete in a space where there's also these bigger conglomerates that are more capitalized, that have more ability to kind of shoulder those upfront costs to get into the space, that by creating a more robust and sort of healthy business environment in these neighborhood centers, that those can kind of be platforms to help businesses get established, build a base, and sort of scale up to participate downtown, versus having downtown kind of be the main option and sort of one that has an increasingly high barrier to entry. So just kind of recognizing that we should continue to kind of fight for that, for downtown itself being, affordable and attainable for business community, not just, the owners and sort of the people who are behind those businesses, but also for the customers, right? To have like a range of businesses downtown. And that we think the gateway neighborhoods have a role to play in kind of creating a more balanced sort of environment where people can kind of get established in more places and build that customer base and sort of be able to then participate more realistically within a really competitive environment downtown. So it's definitely something that early on was something that came through in our engagement. People were raising, both on the business side and on the resident side, people just noticing that shift and being concerned about it and wanting to see that really valued and supported.
Zoe, I really want to compliment you for incorporating a lot of the recommendations that we included in our report to the planning board in November. So I want to drill down to one little area. If you could go back to the prior slide, goal.
Yep.
One of the things, and I should preface it by saying, one of the overall study areas that we've adopted for this year is what we're calling the future of business, a future of work. That's right. Sorry. And when you take that back on some of our recommendations in November, we included things like facilitating the development of incubator spaces for businesses, trying to support the changing nature of work, the gig economy, that type of thing. And you don't quite get there in these recommendations. Do you see that as something that is a separate goal that you eliminated, or do you see that the natural next step from the objectives that you've identified in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would point you a little bit more to this one in terms of like where I think that sits most comfortably in the framing that we've put together at this point. That, you know, I think what you're describing, those are kind of growing industries, right? They're like growing ways of working, places where the economy is kind of shifting into a new space that maybe isn't fully established, but is very much compatible with and sort of complementary to what Portsmouth is already all about. And so maybe it's something that, you know, shows up as a more explicit sort of, you know, sixth supporting sort of recommendation under this objective. One of the things that, you know, I'll jump back to the small business one in a moment, but the sort of the incubator idea is something that we looked at relative to sort of small businesses, maybe not explicitly as a like an accelerator, but as, you know, how can the city participate in encouraging the establishment like of a physical place where those small businesses there's a lower barrier to entry to participate in, be downtown and be in the center of, you know, be in the West End, whatever it is that makes most sense, but to really have that like more premium access to customers and visibility, but at a lower cost by virtue of having like a unified space where you can have a smaller portion of that space that's sort of more attainable. So I think we have that idea in the small business environment in terms of like a physical space. It's more about like a customer facing type of business. But in the way you're talking about it now, I'm realizing I don't think we have a really clear way that we're talking about that for more, you know, more like digital oriented or service oriented businesses that are not really where that like direct customer in-person interface isn't the primary thing driving their growth or prosperity. So yeah, I'm thinking maybe there's something here that could kind of speak to that more directly, but I think it's a good point and something that certainly is already part of the economy in Portsmouth, right? That's something that, you know, people are already have these kind of smaller businesses that are, some of them have a physical presence, some of them don't. But I think having a framework around that could be beneficial. I don't know, Sean, if you want to kind of speak to that at all from your perspective.
Yeah, I think we know we do have that, and that's something this group wanted to look at is, you know, are we a work from home or work from anywhere type of desirable location? I think anecdotally we believe we are. So how do we support that if there's pieces that are missing? So I think having it in this goal would make sense.
And just to highlight kind of where in this, each of these kind of have like a list of more detailed like supporting ideas that are kind of like a starting point for what might carry these ideas forward. So the activating underutilized spaces is where we kind of tucked that in, is thinking that, you know, the best opportunities to create those kinds of like customer facing small business sort of like retail or market sort of interfaces would be in either underutilized publicly owned buildings that are physically well positioned, they're located well for this kind of thing, or institutional real estate portfolios to kind of basically try and identify like what are those spaces that are in premium locations and currently are not being used to their maximum potential, and how could those be like through a partnership, through sort of creative funding, you know, either public grant funding or kind of philanthropic fundraising, how could you use that to create that low barrier to entry kind of space that is that sort of like small business interface with customers. So that's kind of where that sits most comfortably in the, you know, the what we have put together here on the small business side.
Commissioner Steer.
This has been great and great job, Ann. A tremendous amount of work. Obviously, still a lot more to go, but very impressive. it struck me when we were having a conversation about sort of the incubator and support of kind of emerging small businesses and such. We've got a great example of that that's not mentioned here, or at least not sort of explicitly with GoodWorks and nonprofits. And I think, you know, when we say small business, I think naturally most people filter that out, right? We think like retail downtown or something like that, but also integral to like a thriving community is sort of our nonprofit infrastructure, and making sure that somehow is integrated in how we're thinking about things or phrasing things, I think is useful. Speaking of that, can we go back to like slide 1 or 2? I just wanted one quick second to look. I think there was 2 columns of like the main points and then sort of the, not secondary, but there was another column.
Yeah, cross-cutting. Yep. Sorry for the dizzying flip through here.
So it's
Almost there. This one?
yeah, I think that was it. It went really quick and I might have missed it, but it's of top of mind based on our working group sort of thinking about the future. A lot of what we talked about happens to be education, right? And I don't know that it's explicitly mentioned here. Pieces of it are sort of throughout, but I think youth and education is also sort of critical to our vibrant community. And we certainly have that through arts and recreation and in pieces, but you know, just sort of the nature of what it is and making sure that it's one of those cross-cutting topics might be something to consider.
Yeah, that's a great point. So this is something that is always like embedded in some of the bigger thinking around comprehensive plans, or master plans. The terms are kind of interchangeable. That thinking about, you know, the school system and educational institutions, places that people get that training. I think the place where comp plans or master plans are strongest, the thing that they're actually quite good at, is about where should those be located and what kind of investment should be prioritized given these other goals. So it's not necessarily about like the nuts and bolts of what you would expect from like, you know, investing in the public school system, like a strategy for exactly how that should be done. But it's about, you know, okay, we want to really reinforce this as a neighborhood center. That means like if we can continue to hold on to those training centers, those educational institutions being part of a neighborhood center that is more accessible and more well connected, that is part of what the master plan can keep holding on to and point to as like, if we're trying to create a system where people can really get that, you know, leveling up training, not just at, you know, when they're young, but also when they're mid-career or when they're pivoting from one industry to another. Like part of that is making those places embedded in our most accessible and sort of visible parts of our community. And so I think that's where the master plan is strongest. It won't necessarily be particularly strong in shaping the more operational and sort of like curriculum level decisions. But it can be strong in saying like that's part of what it means to have an accessible and like thriving and flexible economy. You need to have accessible places for people to train for whatever they're looking for. So there's one sort of call out that we have for workforce training that's more about those like larger anchor employers or kind of you know, the reskilling for where the economy is going. But certainly that can be something that there's like a nod to that in terms of just how we talk about these gateway neighborhood centers and the importance of those kinds of institutions being part of that neighborhood center vision.
So I'll just say the folks in this room know we have a BT, we have the CTE center at the high school. We have Gather now offering culinary classes. We have Great Bay Community College right here in Portsmouth. So we have this infrastructure, if you will, of education that I think we think about. The average citizen maybe responding is not thinking about that, right? Workforce is something that really matters to the businesses, right? To folks who are starting businesses, trying to grow businesses, and larger companies. It really cuts across the spectrum. And we are fortunate in that we have an infrastructure of education that is really about, well, it's as much about skills as it is about academic achievement, right? So, but to your point to call it out, I mean, I think it's something that needs to be, that we all talk about, but it's protected, how do we strengthen it?
Accessible.
Accessible so that we, I mean, the economy's not gonna thrive if people aren't moving into it with the right skills. We know that, but.
Right, yeah, and for what it's worth, Zoe, another quick shout out, this went out on social media, at least the basics plan a few days ago, and I had a colleague that lives nowhere even close to here specifically reach out to me and rave about this thing. I don't know how this compares with what other cities are getting, but they were very impressed and specifically reached out about it and to talk about it and all the work that went into the kind of community dialogue. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. Always great to hear. Appreciate you sharing that.
Thanks, Zoe, for the presentation today. Of course, let us know how we can be of support. Our CRM is support. You've got a business survey coming up. I'll remind everybody about the community campus event. That's kind of one of the next events for you guys.
Yep.
But thanks so much for taking our discussion and providing such a clear presentation of where you're at.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all for the thoughtful feedback. And I think the next sort of, in addition to promoting the survey and the open house, I think the next sort of biggest moment where we'd love your attention is when we circulate the draft recommendations, which will be shared at the open house, but we'll also circulate them digitally to all of you. We'd love, any more granular feedback that you have for us. That's a great moment for us to hold that in and get that really embedded in the recommendations in the right place. And obviously we hope that you feel like what you've described, today and shared with us previously, that you can see it in those recommendations, but we want to know if there's a place where we're missing the mark or the way that we're talking about it is not quite landing right. So appreciate that attention to those recommendations in the future, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you all. So long.
Yeah, I did want to repeat just one more time, third time. April 22nd, 6 to 8 p.m. Community campus is the public review of the next draft. So it'd be great to get some EDC representation there. I plan to attend that one, and we are, Sean, we are hooked up. We are helping on CRM contacts and.
Yes, I did. So I'll just,
dump or something?
for this survey and open house flyer, I did send it out through my office's CRM.
Cool.
So that went out, and I can send it to this group, so you all can do the same thing. I'll do that right after the meeting.
Excellent.
And I think Ben got a copy of it.
Yeah, we're sending it out as well.
Excellent.
So,
Can add on to that. It'll be somewhat like last September. There'll be a lot of boards on easels.
yeah,
And then I think they're gonna end up at the public library. That's on Monty of finding a location. The last time they were here, and they're thinking put it somewhere else the next time. But, so if you miss the 22nd,
after
the
they'll be
22nd,
Gotcha.
they're gonna be either community campus or the library. Ask Monty. So you can peruse those,
Yeah.
like the 22nd, or you just wanna look at them again.
So additionally, I will ask Zoe for this curated deck. That's why I sent you out the larger deck, because the idea was to get you thinking about what had been done. So we probably last night curated this deck.
This was a little different than what you had.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Those tourism slides weren't in the one we.
I made the call. I said I'd rather have you all be able to at least have the opportunity to see it ahead of time versus walking in cold.
Sure.
Now you're trying to read all the slides. So that was, if you have a better way to do it, let me know. That was my call.
All right, I'm going to shift gears and get us into the working groups. Most working groups have either put a meeting on the calendar or they've already had their first meeting. If you can if a representative from each group can just take, just a few minutes to give us an update on that. Can I pick on you,
Sure.
Josh?
Yeah.
We can lead in.
I'll lead with the future Portsmouth working group. We had a great meeting between all the members a few days back, and really trying to kind of identify, what is it, right? Like, what is it? What's sort of the scope? And we went through that evaluation sort of criteria, intake and decision making framework. And what we sort of determined from it, we have a lot more work to do to sort of filter and gather. But one of the ideas that we had from the group is that this might be a strong kind of landing pad once the city and the EDC is kind of aware of it for these maybe hyper-topical things that come up over time, and so that city staff or council know they have a place to kind of refer, so that we have a group that's already formed that can kind of jump on that. And that might be for sort of infrastructure, which might be, you know, sort of on the tech side, or otherwise workforce, both, you know, adult and kids, changes and trends. Certainly we're seeing a lot of different topics in there that we kind of started talking about. And then changes to the region that might have impact for us and how we're thinking about things. So one of the sort of to-do items from that, before we get back together and have more conversations, is surely there's a lot of already done research sort of around this topic that's not brand new to Portsmouth. So figuring out what's already been done here with city staff that's already been thinking about these things. We don't want to be repeating a bunch of stuff, but also in neighboring communities and sort of industry leaders and such, to get a better handle on, you know, what we can be focusing on first and then report out. So that's kind of where we're at. There wasn't a specific ask in it for us to jump on, and a lot of the topics, like for example, you know, CTE, obviously it's not something I think we're going to be leading with, but you know, they're all integrated together. You know, yeah. Ben, did you have something?
I just wanted to say that the statewide chamber, the BIA, it's an industry association, is I'll learn more this coming week, but I believe they're hiring somebody to do a study on the state of New Hampshire and the future of work. It's replicative of a study I might have shared with you from Virginia. They're hiring someone to put something together for New Hampshire. So we're hearing from the BIA this coming week on what that looks like, and I'll keep you informed.
Yeah, that'd be super informative. And Ben, you're actually on my list of having coffee to catch up with about this specific topic.
Sounds great.
And I'll just add, this whole master plan process was greatly aided by the 10 or 12 plans that were done within the 2 years up to it, which is what Zoe alluded to. All that planning work that was done, they didn't have to do it, so they could really look at, I think, going forward versus trying to figure out where we've been. So that's all there, and I think it might even be summarized on the master plan page, because it talks about all the plans that went into the master plan. It's just one place to go to see what has been done.
That's a good tip.
Good. And you want to just kind of jump in with a summary, or just tell us?
Sean and Wendy and I met yesterday. We looked at the council goal, number 2, parking and transportation, and really dug into what council was looking for. But we also went through the intake and decision-making framework, which was very helpful. That this is a topic no one's asking us to do. It's a little bit redundant with things that are already happening in the city. So from the council goal, we could see that already city staff are working on this topic. Parking and traffic safety is already working on this topic. They're also putting together a task force to broadly look at the topic. And that's what kind of triggered interest in us. Knowing there's going to be a task force put in place, and the members are not named yet, we do know that Sean will be on this task force because he's on the board of Coast Bus.
Right.
The question we thought, perhaps instead of a working group studying it and being redundant with what is already happening, what if the EDC had a seat on this task force? And that seemed more logical to us than working in our own path in a silo away from other people who are already doing this. So thoughts, throw that out, thoughts on that. I also pooled, and I can circulate this exactly 2 years ago, March of 24, we had a working group on public transportation specifically. We came back with a study that we did on Coast, Wildcat, and C&J. I have that as a quick little one-page looks at all 3 of them of kind of what do we have in place, action items for each of those categories. It is 2 years old, so it's not totally as current as it is, but it does exist from the EDC in a pretty concise manner.
And I'll just add that in addition to this what went into the CIP, if you recall, was a request to put some money aside to look at a parking garage, and then another counselor attached some money to do a study to expand public transportation. So it looks like there'll be
Money.
two efforts that the EDC is gonna wanna keep track of once the budget is set and there's these two, the CIP item is put into play.
And
right?
I can see that in
yeah.
the council goal, it is split out into parking is a separate goal.
Right.
Parking doesn't specifically say it'll have a task force.
No,
The
no.
shuttle loop feasibility does have a task force. They do have funding for consultants.
Right.
Both have apparently funding for consultants and city staff looking at it. So thoughts on the going forward, we kind of raise our hand. I mean, or not. Sean's already gonna be on this task force. I guess the bigger question is, would we like a seat of our own on the task force? I personally think that's a yes, we would. It seems relevant to us.
It seems the scope of that working group and your task force are.
Yes, it's the same thing. But council members, do you have any thought of when the task force would start to be put together? Has that been discussed, or it's?
No, and I don't know if that's supposed to help monitor after the RAP, the resident area parking program,
Well,
or is that supposed to be?
I don't think they're
I don't-
related, I think RAP
Okay.
is its own.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that doesn't
That's
seem
through
to be
PT
in this.
That's through PTS, and that's,
Because not every counselor, I think, has the same goal on parking.
Like you
I'll be
did vote
blatantly honest with that.
at your retreat, you
Yeah.
did put this goal.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's on your
And we
website.
pick our battles, you know.
Right. My
Yeah.
understanding, Counselor, is that the city manager's been given approval to put a task force together once there's funding for. The CIP is already approved, budget gets approved, CIP gets approved if it's not changed, and, you know, as of July 1, it's
So
ready
this
to
would
go
be
forward.
funding that would start,
July
'Cause-
1,
so it's not happening right
that's right,
at this moment.
that's right. Now, there was a pre-task force meeting that I,
Okay, you have to give us the
that I
info.
attended. Well, the city manager invited Coast, because that's really the main partner, just to say, here's what the city's been thinking about and talking about, and here's what the city council has approved us to do going forward. And we really just wanted to get them thinking high level. If we come back in a few months and start talking about whether it be loops, whether it be partnerships with downtown businesses and the city to create some type of workforce loop and or potentially get the frequency down to a half an hour, what would that look like? So we've planted the seed with Coast. Now, I go to the Coast board meetings once a month, so I'm happy. I mean, they're more than willing to get excited and get into that conversation with us. So I think all the things are in place and the seeds have been planted, and it's really just a matter of at what point will we have enough to create a task force, and what should that look like?
I guess one concern I would have is just that if there is a gap between when the task force is active and when the parking and transportation working group kind of shifts lanes and goes into that, it wouldn't want to lose the monitoring of what's going on, and it sounds like you're not losing that, but
Well, and I think Sean's our monitor.
yeah.
If you're in these pre-task force conversations
Yeah.
and you're on the Coast Board,
For that piece, yes.
For that
Yeah,
piece.
but just to go back to the parking piece, I was on the team, the internal team that worked with the parking consultant a couple of years ago. So if you remember, I would bring updates to EDC on that. But I don't know what parking going forward looks like.
Yeah, I mean, because right now there's a lot obviously, and parking encompasses everything. I'm always trying to think of if we're trying to incentivize bike ped use, you know what I mean, then we really shouldn't be incentivizing parking. If you incentivize the use of a bike, then right, you make it.
Yeah.
You can't
There's a new
incentivize
committee,
the car
right?
too.
There's a new
committee to
task
implement-
force.
Yeah. So I always find those
So it's really
conflicting.
mobility is what.
And then we're also talking about a third parking garage. You know what I mean? So there's
Right.
there's conflicting, you know what I mean, ideas. These things fight each other, but it is the nature of the beast that the city
I
of
should have said
Portsmouth
that
is.
too. We don't really want to talk about bike bed because there's a task force that people are applying for right now.
Right. But you know what I mean? The way I look at it is they both affect each other, you know?
Yeah, maybe it's a question of monitoring and looking to synthesize
Really don't.
and well,
Yeah. Because if we have a big parking lot on the outskirts of town and then there's a nice bike path into town, you know what I mean? Then maybe you eliminate all this traffic, all this, the parking becomes on less expensive land, less demanded land. I don't know, just that's where I think of like it all works together.
We are the
But,
land of rain and snow.
If you just put more parking spots downtown, then more cars will drive downtown. There'll be more traffic leading into all the avenues downtown. Be more demand. I don't know. Yeah.
I guess one question, I remember the research you did and it was fantastic 2 years ago. Do you see anything different with the master plan talking about having more like neighborhood clusters and hubs influencing the shape of that plan? Or do you think, or investigators are different things to look at given non-downtown hubs?
What I really see as shifting is that 2 years ago, Coast was very rigid about not wanting to expand loops, not wanting to add a stop to a loop. They specifically used the word, we don't want to have spaghetti, that they have loops going all over the place. And I feel like that is softening at Coast, that they're starting to understand their future may depend on being a little more flexible about routes and stops.
Or the hub and spoke model then?
I'll say yes, but being more flexible increases cost, and that is not something.
Well, my inbox is also flooded with the fundraiser that Coast is having.
And I brought a flyer.
And you want it?
They are very
Live
actively reaching out to businesses for donations. They're having a fundraiser. It's very soon, like
Yeah,
next week.
so basically,
So they're really looking for money.
right, their funding model has changed, and they've realized they can't depend on the federal government or the state government, and therefore they've been, for I would say, the last 6 to 8 months, expanding and going on tour and inviting businesses. This particular fundraiser is just to get them over the line on their capital campaign for a new facility in Dover, which would serve them. So anyway, that this is specifically to that. But and you might recall a couple months ago they had to reduce service in Portsmouth. The last bus out is earlier than it used to be. So they're open to whatever we want to do as a city to look at to improve public transit and frequency and things like that. I just want to caution that putting bus stops everywhere is kind of opposite of what would make sense for them. And the way they explain it, and I trust them, it would actually degrade service. When you try to serve everybody, it degrades the core service versus taking a 1 hour frequency to a half-hour frequency. That improves service.
All right, I'm gonna jump in. We got one more working group report out.
I'll be brief.
That wasn't a lead in where you have to be brief.
No, Michelle and I met before we knew Phil was interested, so we had very preliminary meeting. Like many of you, we're trying to find our space in the crowded ecosystem. Michelle has access to all the committees that are out there, and there's a cultural committee and there's public art committee. So we decided that we need more input before we decide where we focus. We are thinking about where art supports local business. How do public spaces increase foot traffic or, retention? We are focused on where the gaps are versus where duplication, essentially similar things that you work on in your veins. So we are planning to meet with another city councilor, Kate Cook, who is very heavily involved in the arts and culture enrichment part of Portsmouth. We'll bring Phil with his ideas. So we're still trying to figure out what the scope is, what the framework is for our work. But, it has begun. The conversations have begun.
Excellent.
Right, Michelle? Anything else? Did I miss anything? Okay.
I've always had one idea for art that I've always mentioned to the Public Art Review Committee.
Oh.
But it involves working with the PHA, is the Margerson building. It's got two like blank canvases on each side. They're big, like right as you drive into downtown. But I always imagine a piece of artwork up there would just totally change that entrance to the city and the building or the perception of that building.
Put a new whaling wall over there.
Yeah, and it's an historic district, so nobody's
Vertical
not going
whale,
anywhere.
maybe?
Oh my gosh. You know
Or
what?
like King Kong going up the South Street.
If anybody has ideas,
So I support Park and the Arts and Cultural Commission
we should
as the
talk.
city rep, right, so I would love to come to that meeting, because Counselor Cook is the city council rep, I'm the staff rep, and then you've got these two groups, so we're
Love it.
always talking about art.
Awesome, yeah. And if anybody else has ideas or wants to build a sculpture for Market Square, let us know.
I guess my question is, and I'll second Rich's comment about the Marchant Building, because I've always thought that it's an obvious campus, but if our role really is focusing on economic development, then I'm not sure, us making recommendations on where there ought to be a piece of art really accomplishes that. So the question is, how do we tie the arts and the culture into the business community and support for increased tourism or events that draw a lot of the residents into town or something like that? There's a lot of, as you say, there's a lot of players in the art space. And, I think the idea we discussed and Ben at the Chamber is working on, which is creating a community calendar, that's a good example of how you can add value that benefits the business community. Before we just get into saying we need to have more sculptures or whatever the piece of art is, I think we have to think about the purpose for the EDC.
I'll just give a couple examples. You're right, Tom, and as you all have heard me say, there's a lot of energy in the city around art, and these folks are on it. But having said that, there's two examples of the Arts and Culture Commission partnering with small business. One is they had stickers made up that say, we support arts, the arts support us, and they handed them out to retailers to put in their windows, working with the chamber. So that they recognize the value of what the arts brings, like the after report that says $70 million is spent regionally. That was a couple of years ago. And the second one is Councilor Cook connected the Poet Laureate program with the Arts and Culture Commission, because somebody saw that in Brattleboro, and basically we put poems in retail windows. So there's this whole effort to collaborate between, let's say, the downtown merchants and the artist community. So there's a lot of that happens naturally, and I just wanted this group to know that the Arts and Cultural Commission specifically looks for ways to work with the business community. So the ground is already plowed. So I think just connecting with that would be helpful.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm gonna fold in one more agenda item. I know we have about 20 minutes, and this is not gonna result in a discussion or a vote, but we promised back in January of coming back to our April meeting with a discussion about our summer EDC schedule. And we said we were gonna circle back and we were gonna base it on our working group startup and see whether the EDC wants to consider canceling the July 10th or the August 7th meeting. So the working group meetings could choose to monitor and continue their progress during that period. There just would not be obviously a report out if the group chose that. And the idea back in January, I think December, January timeframe when we were looking at the workshop planning would be, it's in recognition that our meeting is early on a Friday morning during our precious few weeks of summer. maybe we could cancel now before summer realizes it's here, turns evil, and hits us with a nor'easter. That was kind of the gist of it all. So we also need to keep in mind, we need to have 5 commissioners present to have a quorum. I will say we haven't had that problem in July and August in the 5 years that I've seen that. I'm putting that out there, but it hasn't been a problem in general. I think instead of people, looking at their calendars, maybe 1 week before our May meeting, Sean and I can get together and just put out, it's kind of 2 questions, yes, no, and July, August, kind of thing. And that way folks can
What's the
think about
purpose
it.
of canceling the meeting? Is there already a concern with the quota? Because we used to not meet in July and August, and we made a change to meet in July and August, so what's driving it?
Yeah, it was like a small group discussion about are we already going to be pushing it and are people's vacation schedules in the summer? It was really wasn't much more than that. And it did reference the historic calendar.
Don't we need at least 6 to have a quorum? There's 12 members in the commission.
No, it's
They need a order.
5 of 9.
Okay.
There's only 9 official members.
Okay.
Everybody else is ex officio.
Okay.
I don't count.
Because I thought Phil, because we have Sarah, Andrew, you, Phil, myself, Bob, and I don't count?
No, you're
Okay.
ex officio.
You're
Okay.
you're a liaison.
Okay. All right. No, I'm just making sure we're following.
That's all.
I was just counting and I was like, I thought we had 12.
And I just want to throw out that the May meeting is during April break week,
Yeah.
so we might have a quorum. I'm not here.
Right.
Should ask about a quorum before that meeting. too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just-
Thank you. All right, like I said, I don't really need to open this up to discussion, but I think maybe the best way to handle it is give everybody 2 or 3 weeks. Plant the seed, give everyone 2 or 3 weeks, put out an email. And get
Do you want to show of hands on who won't be here in May? I think that's important.
Yeah.
I'm not here.
I'll zoom in, but I won't be, I'll be in Florida, so.
Thanks, Sean.
That's all right, well, just,
Yeah.
Okay, so you're probably okay.
So we're probably okay. So that would be 6 left. What am I thinking?
so, yeah. So while we're talking about
First.
meetings,
May 1st. Just the
That's-
Friday
well,
of
I'll
April
talk to you
break week.
Yeah, okay. All right. That was that. So next on the agenda is our city council update from Councilor Flynn and Councilor Blaylock. You guys can.
Yeah.
Been in a meeting since we met.
No,
That's right.
we do have a meeting on Monday night. I just got out the agenda for last night. We are going to be looking at scheduling a first reading for sewer fees. We had a work session on that, just talking about sewer and wastewater. How to try to, what legally, you can do to try to give the resident a break and try to charge the people that are using, the large corporations, the Lonzas of the world. If you need bigger pipes because they're bigger usage, then that cost should probably go to that user. But we'll just scheduling first reading. So we have a zoning change, approval of Seacoast Eat Local, the farmers market. We'll be scheduling first reading or potentially for the resident area parking program. We'll looking to approve the school custodial employees and cafeteria agreement, their contract. There's not much else. We're accepting Jason Goodrich's resignation from the Public Art Review Committee. Hopefully so he can spend more time with the EDC, if he's watching. We did have a wonderful visit from our Friendship City guest from Sant'Angelo, Mayor Sacchetti, former Mayor Parma, and they also gave us a gift of it's a poetry and lights. So we actually met with the Public Art Review Committee and started talking about that. Brought the artist Tiziano, who is actually here. He's got his work displayed in New York. He's got it all over the world. So I think we were envisioning it maybe Von Mall but it's a really cool I think one way it'll be in English, and then the other way you'll read it in Italian. But it was a poem about air and the space around your head, and when you laugh it lightens.
And,
Yes, I
and
know,
it was,
it's
it
good.
was a gift,
Yeah.
it was accepted.
And Ben Van Camp he came up with the idea on the Sister City Committee of having art from our sister cities. So this would actually be our first art representative of a sister city. Yeah. So, but you know what I mean, going forward as far as like art and ideas and stuff, I always think that enriches our culture, just showing like, you know, this isn't just random art, right? This is art because, you know, this artist is from our sister city. This sister city is our sister city because of this.
Right.
It has a story, it has a meaning, it has a history. But yeah, Councilor Flynn. anything
I was
to
just
add?
gonna remind everybody that April 20th, we have a work session with Community Power. There'll be representatives from Community Power there. We're talking about the rates and the automatic enrollment that went out and just sort of exploring that. So that'll be the April 20th meeting.
Sean, you wanna hop in?
No. With my update?
No, with your update.
What I
Just
missed?
said no.
I'm doing lightning round.
Yeah, so we have 10 applications for outdoor dining, all the usual suspects. Nothing's changed since last year. I go to those meetings, so if anything, any problems come up, I'll find out. If you hear of any challenges, let me know, and I'll bring them to the group that reviews these. But 10 so far.
Sounds good.
And yeah, I've got, well, that's it.
Did you
I
have,
will share the Coast Capital Campaign flyer if anybody wants to go to that. But I think that's all I have.
is it a similar cadence, Sean, as last year? Did you have about 10 or did you have more around this time?
It was similar last year. I believe like 30. Oh, I don't know. I didn't track it that closely, but
You think we'll have 30?
there's going to be there may be some construction impact. Although Noah Cafe has already put one in. We just may have we always reserve the right to change the dates based on city projects. So be it Vaughan Mall, not that there's anything going on in Vaughan Mall now, or will be, but certainly Congress Street. The Noah Cafe is probably the only one that's impacted.
Yeah.
I feel like Thirsty Moose and the Works are going to be fine because they're further up from the construction. Yeah.
Okay.
And you wanna chip in with the Chamber Collaborative?
Yeah,
update?
sure. Very, very busy time of year for us. We have programming at sort of an all-time high, and we're also in the throes of planning next fiscal year. So we're just kind of humming along here and a pretty fast pace. So earlier this week we had a great housing breakfast on Tuesday. Sean's gonna, I think, hopefully share the deck from that out with this group when he can, where it was a great conversation and look at where housing is and where it is for our workforce in the community. Heard from PHA, we heard from the housing committee through Jen Stebbins Thomas, who's a member of that and also a member of the business community, great kind of liaison between that. We heard from Peter Britz, and I would have thanked him if he was still here for his presentation on projects that are coming up in the city. So that was a great breakfast event earlier this week. We have a number of those events coming up. There's one that focuses on the maritime economy and the port, and there's one that focuses on peas and what's happening out there in the airport and what that means for our economy. So those are really pretty good programming if you want to get a better like in-depth look at certain aspects of our economy. A couple other things to highlight, and then I want to spend a moment talking about some work that we're doing where it might intersect with the master plan. Restaurant Week starts this coming week. The kickoff is Wednesday, so Thursday to the following Saturday is Restaurant Week. So restaurantweek.com for all those menus and reservation links and things like that. Tonight is Art Round Town. And the other two things I'll mention is we are looking at a complete and total rebuild of our tourism website. Go portsmouthnh.com. It's a good site right now. It's older and needs to be brought up to today's sort of standards. So this project is pretty large for us. It's expensive. It will incorporate a lot of AI tools, including the calendar tool that you referenced earlier, where it will go out to our members and bring their events into our calendar without them having to do that work themselves. So it also will hopefully feature a trip building itinerary tool that's in partnership with the state of New Hampshire. So that if you go on there and you say, I'm going to visit Portsmouth for 2 or 3 days, I like history, craft beer, and Italian food, it'll say, great, here's your schedule for your whole trip, here's where you eat, here's where you go see your history, here's the breweries we would recommend, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really a robust planning tool. And I don't know if you're like my family, it's all AI when it comes to restaurant recommendations and when you travel. So the last piece I'll mention, since there's a little bit more time before 9, is the Chamber for a long time has had a dormant 501c3 organization. Chambers of Commerce's are 501c6 organizations. We don't need to get into the details on that, but we've had this nonprofit that's been dormant for a very long time, at least 10 plus years. It was founded to put together the historic walking trails and all the markers that you see around the city. So it's very arts and historical education kind of narrowly focused right now, and we're broadening that out. And the goal of that kind of rebirth of this foundation will be to focus on workforce development, research, and being there as an emergency tool for businesses in our community that maybe experience a fire or a flood or something like that and need some support, that have a tragedy. So one of the things that we're looking at is some really robust software tools that will help us address some of the things that were brought up in this master plan. So reading that, I was like, wow, okay, we can check that box, and we're like, so like a great example of like the revenue per visitor or whatever it was, or, income per visitor or value per visitor. How the heck would we track that? We have no mechanism to track that right now. But this software is very robust, and it will tell us exactly who's visiting our community, how long they're staying, what they're doing when they're here, what are they, through some fancy algorithms say roughly how much are they spending when they're here, what are the trends on that, where are they coming from, what are their hobbies, all these kind of metrics that will allow us to be much more targeted in our marketing, and will give us some data to really say what is happening in our economy from a visitation standpoint. It can look at specific events like a Market Square Day or an air show or whatever, and say, how long are these people going to be in our community? What are they doing when they get here? How long are they staying? Like, what are, all these things. So we can really kind of get very granular with it and have a much stronger tool to be able to know what's going on. Because right now we are flying blind, right? Like we are in the fog. There is no data. There is no navigation screen whatsoever. We are just, trying to do great things and make our community as great as possible, and really are hoping people will come. And that's not a recipe for success. It might have been at one point, but it's a more sophisticated world now, and I think we need to be better at tracking this stuff. So we're really excited about that. We're putting together some funding sources to purchase that tool, and I'd love to share more with you all about it at some point when that's convenient. But I think it's a really worthwhile investment from our community.
And just to build on that, in case anybody doesn't know, the city funds the chamber to do that work. Like I don't do tourism, and if the city had to hire someone to do tourism, that would be very expensive. So all the things that Ben's talking about and the investments they're making and the opportunity, all this is available to the city, and there's opportunities. And so this is just a great relationship. And I sometimes I'm envious of Ben because he has a staff as small as they are, but he's got a great board, and they've got membership, and they've got the ability to make investments. And so we're investing in that, and Ben does the hard work. But just to make sure everybody understands that there is a relationship that really serves the city well.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Ben. I don't see any members from the public, so I'll open and close the public part. And we can move on to adjourning. I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. And all those in favor?
Aye.
And, adjourned. Happy Easter, everybody.